You are taking a live look from one of the earth cams that are located over in this area. That is Bourbon Street on New Orleans, which we do know reopened to foot traffic and folks out there just yesterday. I do also want to pop up this video right here on your screen. This is coming in from Crystal Restaurant, and it was provided to Live Now from Fox. You can actually watch there as people on Bourbon Street in that area in New Orleans jump out of the way as the U.S. Army veterans sped toward those victims. Again, we're looping it here so you can get a better look as everyone just runs out of the way. The FBI now confirms that Shamsuddin Jabbar posted 5 videos on his Facebook account in the hours before the attack, aligning himself with ISIS. Law enforcement also say they found an Islamic State flag on the truck that was used in that terror attack. So much to discuss and so many developments, but still a lot of questions as well. I do want to bring in Bobby McDonald, a retired supervisory Secret Service agent, now a lecturer in criminal justice at the University of New Haven. We're going to discuss all of this. Thank you so much for taking the time, as always, to be here with us.
Good morning, Josh. Always a pleasure to be with you.
And first off, I do want to talk about the overall situation as it started to develop on Wednesday morning. As somebody who worked in law enforcement for a fairly long time, I do want to get your take. What was going through your mind as you heard those details really start to emerge?
Yeah, a very horrific situation, and obviously not a very good way to start 2025. I think knowing that area quite well, having been to New Orleans numerous times, having worked in New Orleans, having walked across Canal Street onto Bourbon Street at that very location, very familiar with that, very familiar with that Crystal Restaurant and the film that you just showed, the new angle of the truck going down the street. Very horrific situation, a lot of carnage, a lot of damage. A little bit of concern once we got to the first press conference with respect to some of the statements. As you know, I'm very hesitant to criticize law enforcement early on these type of situations. It's chaotic. There's a lot of unknowns that are out there. As we trickled through to see what was happening there, we had the first indication from the FBI assistant special agent in charge that it was not terrorism. And then a moment or so later, the mayor said it was terrorism. So that was a little bit of a concern. And then I was also very concerned with respect to the comments made by the police captain, who said we didn't have a vehicle type situation on our radar with respect to our security plan. My goodness, Bourbon Street is one of the busiest pedestrian streets that we have in our country. It's busy every single night. The bollard situation there that's being repaired for the Super Bowl, that's terrific. That didn't help us on New Year's Eve. So very concerned with that bollard situation, that they didn't have a more robust vehicle in place to assist and make sure that something like this happens. So I think that's going to be part of the story moving forward.
And what has actually stood out to you overall? I mean, you touched on this a little bit, but as the investigation has progressed, when we're talking local, state, and federal law enforcement all involved in this, what overall has maybe stood out to you about the investigation and what we've learned so far, and really what is still left to figure out?
Yeah, again, still a lot of unknowns here. I think we're trying to figure out the pieces of the puzzle. How did this happen? Why did it happen? How could we have prevented it? We've got to work hard to prevent these type of things. You've got Mardi Gras coming up down there. You've got the Super Bowl coming up. You've got the inauguration. You've got the President Carter funeral and the certification of the election of the Speaker of the House today. There are a lot of big events that are going on around the country. There are a lot of cities that do big events very well. LA, Vegas, New York, Chicago do big events, conventions, and things all the time. There are a lot of cities around the country that are doing events that unfortunately don't have the resources that some of these bigger cities do, don't have the experience that some of these bigger cities do on having events. And they've got to be very cognizant now of how to make sure that they're sealing off the events and the venues that are in their area. You know, we also all have to be very cognizant, and you've heard me say this before, of being situationally aware of everywhere we go. We don't want to live in fear, but when you go to a school, you go to a church, you go to a mall, you need to know how to get yourself out of that venue and get yourself out of a potentially serious situation. First responders and police will come and take care of the situation. But when the incident happens, you've got to figure out a way to get yourself immediately out of that bad situation and get you and your family to safety.
One thing we know is that hours after the New Orleans attack happened, we then had the Cybertruck explosion that was right outside of the Trump Hotel over in Las Vegas. As of right now, the FBI says there is, quote unquote, no definitive link between the two. But first off, I did want to ask you, that doesn't necessarily mean there is no link, right? It just means as of right now, they have not found a definitive link between the two.
Absolutely right, Josh. What's going to be continuing to happen is the folks in New Orleans and the folks in Las Vegas are going to be sharing information to see if there is any link. Just because they're indicating right now there is not a link doesn't mean that some good old-fashioned police work, knocking on doors, getting the information that's out there, being able to put those pieces of the puzzle together. If there is that puzzle, we'll be able to answer that question for us. Again, as of right now, there doesn't seem to be any connection. But there are a few nuggets of information in both of the cases that would lend us to think, hey, maybe there is some type of connection here. It may just be a huge coincidence, but they'll be working those leads out and running them out to get those answers for us, hopefully very soon.
And with your experience in law enforcement, I want to get your take on that. When you have this New Orleans terror attack happen and then the Cybertruck explosion, what was going through your mind at that point as you hear about the Cybertruck situation, again, right outside of the Trump Hotel in that valet area that's essentially right outside of the front door?
Well, I think the first thing that comes to mind is how many more of these incidents now are going to happen? Are we going to have a succession of things going on with respect to nefarious activity? How do we stop that? And how do we then try to connect those things to see if they're connected? And are they part of a bigger situation or conspiracy? We have to go into all of these situations ready to take any possible lead, any nugget of information, and run it to as far as we can get it to try to put those things together. We don't want to anticipate, we don't want to assume, but we want to make sure that our country is going to remain safe, that all of the intelligence can be passed on to all of the law enforcement agencies all around the country to make sure that they're looking out for similar activity in their community and copycats. We've got to look out for copycats now that people are going to take what happened in New Orleans, take what happened in Las Vegas, and for some reason want to try to figure out how to engage in nefarious activity in their community. Josh, this time of year, a lot of people, we're engaging in joyous events in around the holidays and the New Year. But for a lot of people, this is a very dark time, a very sad time. I think information is coming out that the individual in Las Vegas was having some problems at home, that his wife and he may have been having some marital issues, and this may have led him to this type of activity. We've got to watch our friends and neighbors, make sure they're okay, make sure they're taking their medication. If they need some mental health counseling, we've got to help them get that. This is a much bigger issue than just someone driving a truck or a car in front of a hotel and blowing it up. We've got to now try to find out what led people to do this and how can we hopefully stop these type of activities before they manifest themselves.
Going back to specifically the situation in New Orleans, I want to get your take as well on this. What do you think of the flow of information that is coming in from local, state, and federal law enforcement as all of this develops? It's important to note, and you mentioned this, that the mayor came out hours later and said this is a terror attack, followed up by the FBI saying this is not a terror attack, and then hours later retracting that and saying it is a terror attack. So what do you think of the flow of information as all of this is still developing?
Once we have these incidents, Josh, we've got to now figure out a crisis communication plan. We've got to get timely, pertinent information out to our public so that they can remain confident in the law enforcement officials that are investigating the crime. There is going to be a chaotic time in all this, and I understand that. But the leaders of those agencies and the leaders of those communities need to come together, and I hate to say it, put together a script, at least at the original press conference, to send a message out that we are in control of the situation. We are investigating the situation. There are going to be things that they can't talk about, and I fully understand that. But they have to be able to decide what information can get out to the public so that the public can remain confident that the community is secure. You had the ball game down there in New Orleans that was delayed by a day. People had to make sure, or the leaders of that community need to make sure that people are going to feel safe engaging in that community. In New Orleans is a party town. They are a convention town. They are a large sports town. They bring in visitors every day, and people need to make sure that they feel comfortable and will continue to feel comfortable going into that location to participate in those type of events.
What question or questions do you still have that you hope maybe law enforcement will answer possibly in the coming days or weeks? We've talked about this a few times already, but there are so many questions that are left unanswered at this point, and we may never get some of the answers. But what question or questions do you specifically hope could be answered?
Well, I think we really need to drill down onto that location of Canal Street and Bourbon Street. Canal is one of the major arteries in New Orleans. I think it's 6 or 8 lanes in length, or in width, I should say. And to have been able to allow a vehicle to basically just drive around a police car at the most important intersection that would be providing security for that Bourbon Street on New Year's Eve, I just don't understand it. And I think there's going to have to be some hard questions answered by the police department down there, by the chief, by that police captain. You know, she came out, the chief of police came out yesterday and said, we're going to work hard to now harden our targets and make our city better. Well, that's nice. But the fact of the matter is, I can't think there's a whole lot of difference between Bourbon Street on the night of the Super Bowl and Bourbon Street on the night of New Year's Eve. So I think a missed opportunity here to provide some good coverage. Looking at that video that's going on right now, oh my gosh, I can't believe that angle showing the speed of that vehicle. It's hard to believe that more people weren't hit. I hate to say thankfully more people weren't hit. I do say thankfully, but I'm amazed that the carnage there is not of a much higher number, looking at the speed of that vehicle coming around that corner on Bourbon and Canal. A very, very telling video that you're showing right now.
Yeah, and it's hard to believe as you watch that, and you can see everyone essentially, I hate to say this, but running for their lives at this point. We're actually going to talk to one of the witnesses here who sadly lost one of their friends coming up a little bit later on this morning. But one thing I do want to ask you about as we take this live look over the Capitol building here in D.C., we're a couple days out. As someone who was with the Secret Service, I want to get your take, because there was apparently an unrelated situation near the Capitol yesterday with a quote-unquote suspicious vehicle that was seen driving on the sidewalk. We're talking again a day after 2 terror attacks in major U.S. cities. I have to imagine that a situation like this so close to the Capitol has to be even more concerning than usual to law enforcement as all of this is going on.
Absolutely. The 2 incidents that we've had the last couple of days have really heightened the vigilance of not only the people in Washington, D.C., but in major cities and major tourist locations like that. You know, we've got the inauguration coming up in a couple of weeks. That is a national special security event, which brings a level of assets and personnel and funding to an event which is in place in Washington, D.C. D.C. does a lot of events just like all these other cities. They see these type of things every day. You've also got President Carter's funeral, and you've got, again, the certification of the election coming up. So a lot going on in and around D.C. D.C. handles suspicious people and suspicious vehicles very, very well. It happens more than you would think. A lot of times people show up at the White House looking to see the president and are assisted by the Secret Service with either getting some alcohol treatment or mental health counseling. It happens quite often. So the D.C. area is well prepared to handle suspicious things like that. But this does heighten the vigilance. And, you know, those copycat type situations that I mentioned earlier are of a very big concern to the D.C. law enforcement officials.
And of course, I could talk to you forever about this, but I do have to let you go at some point. I did want to ask you, though, my final question. Where do the investigations, both the one in New Orleans and the one in Las Vegas, where do they go from here? What's next?
Well, we're really not going to have a prosecution in either case. You've got the perpetrators who are deceased and no longer with us. I think that the investigation in New Orleans and obviously in Vegas, too, is going to lead us to see how to continue to harden our events, how to make our events accessible, yet make them safer. You know, we're all used to standing in line now at the airport. We're used to standing in line for a search when we go to an arena. You know, are we going to be searched when we go to the mall? Are we going to have heightened security in and around our churches and continuing with our schools? I think if we're going to have a resurgence of this type of activity or a larger amount of nefarious activity by perpetrators, I think we're going to have to be prepared to go through added layers of security to make sure that the venues that we're attending on a regular basis are safe and sound for our families and friends.
All right, Bobby McDonald, as always, thank you so much for taking the time to join us and help break all this down. Anything else you want to add before I let you go?
Well, again, I'd like to add my condolences to the folks, families who lost loved ones, not only the victims, but also, unfortunately, the families of the perpetrators who are now going to have to deal with this issue as well. Very tough on all of those people involved in these situations. So condolences out to all those involved.
All right. Thank you again for being here, and have a good rest of your day and weekend. We appreciate it.
Always a pleasure, Josh. See you on the next one.